Close your eyes and imagine. What if the things in life that cause us the greatest pain, the things that bring us grief, are challenges? Challenges designed to help us grow, to ultimately become what we were always meant to be. We feel like we've been buried, but what if, like a seed, we've been planted? And having been planted, we grow to become a mighty tree. Now, open your eyes. Open your eyes to this way of viewing life. Come with me as we explore your true, infinite, eternal nature. This is Grief to Growth, and I am your host, Brian Smith. Hi, everybody. This is Brian back with another episode of Grief to Growth. Today, I got with me Vony Eichel, and Vony was born and bred in New York, where she attended C.W. Post College of LIU, Long Island University, but she lived all of her adult life in London. Vony's explored many careers. She's worked as a Blue Badge tour guide. She studied for the stock exchange and finance industry, behavioral psychology, systems analysis, but she finally found her calling as an exercise therapist for the elderly, disabled, and those with special needs, and psychiatric ex-offenders. Her passions are ballet and wild swimming. She lives on a beach in West Sussex, UK. And today we're here to talk about her book, which is called A Reason to Carry On. And it's a fascinating book about what she's learned through her life and through her time as an exercise therapist with the people we talked about earlier. So with that, I want to welcome to Grief to Growth, Vony Eichel.
Thank you so much.
Vony, it's good to have you here today. You've had quite an interesting life. You've been through several different careers and ended up, I guess, as an exercise therapist. So tell me about how things kind of progressed for you.
Well, unfortunately, I was one of those people who didn't find my calling for a long time. And it actually, the only thing I did know is I developed a passion for ballet. And then what happened was I broke my leg rather badly, not with doing ballet. And it was a compound spinal fracture, and I was laid up for a year. And it was terrible pain and debilitating. You can't understand what it's like to be handicapped unless you're sitting in someone's shoes. And I did. I sat in wheelchairs, on crutches, and it was a very bad break. And I suffered tremendously because I was someone with ADHD and always have to be running, as you can see from my past careers, always doing something. And there I was enforced to stay at home and stuck. And what turned into the most productive year of my life, because I found out what my true calling was. I loved ballet. I was interested in spirituality, and I thought putting the two things together, it worked so well. And I thought that was it. That's what I was meant to do in life, and I didn't know it all the time.
Yeah, it's interesting how life sometimes seems to put us on a track that we don't know that we need to be on.
Yeah, I would have never thought that I would do what I was doing. It would have been so much easier to jump so many years later and find out who I really was, the real me.
Yeah. So do you think our lives are sort of planned, or what's your feeling about that?
Very much so, because I did behavioral psychology. And one thing I learned there, that 50% of our personality is formed at the time of conception. So, but if you think even more than that, it's who your parents are, your social background, your education, it's all mapped out from when you're born. So I don't know how much free will we really do have. I'm sure we do. But within what degree we have it, I don't know.
Yeah, that's an interesting paradox, I guess, the different, free will and planning. And it's something that I kind of wrestle with. I think there's a certain amount of free will, but there's just too much going on in our lives that seems to be guided from somewhere else.
Oh, yes, definitely. And, people, they can't really, like for myself, example, I didn't know who I was. It took me so long to find out who I was. And people sometimes go through life and they really don't know themselves, or they have their masks on and they've never taken them off.
But it's interesting because even though you say you didn't know who you were, you've integrated all these various aspects of your earlier life into who you are today. So none of it was lost.
No, I think nothing's ever lost. Whatever you learn in life, you
Mm-hmm.
carry and you use it for something else.
Mm-hmm.
So nothing you learn, no experience that you have, I believe, is ever lost or wasted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could tell that as I was reading your book, and you were exercise therapist, but your behavioral psychology, your understanding of the human condition comes through very clearly in the book, and you can tell you're using it in your work even as you're working as an exercise therapist.
Well, I think everyone needs to have empathy. And I went into these homes, and sometimes it was shocking. It was like hitting you in the face. It was so, the smell and the whole, the sadness of it. And yet it proved to be the most rewarding time of my life. The more needy the people, the more pleasure I got from being able to give to them, because ultimately the receiving is in the giving. So
Yeah.
much.
And as you're going into these homes, as I'm reading the book, I'm thinking these are things that most of us avoid. We avoid being in places like that. They make us sad. They make us afraid. You're dealing with some people with some very serious uh, psychological issues, criminals, people like the people that we would rather turn away from. So why do you think you found it so rewarding, going into these places that most of us would like to avoid?
Okay, when you talk about psychiatric ex-offenders, I was in a room alone. Nobody was supervising us, and there was a pedophile, a rapist, robbers and arsonists, you name it. And I was never, ever afraid, because they knew that I cared. And they showed their vulnerable side. The minute they stepped out of the room, you could hear them screaming at the staff or whatever. But I guess I came out over as genuine. And I believed I saw the genuine thing, because these people, they all have their masks on. When you come from a deprived society, your brain is affected, as our brains are all plastic, and it molds to protect oneself. You can't trust anyone. So you're in protection mode. So the biggest thing for these people are, how someone looked at them, or someone bumped into them, to have respect. Well, they didn't need that with me. All they needed to be was themselves. And it was very difficult to get them to do exercises because they wanted to talk. And I said, I'm an exercise therapist. I'm not even a proper, behavioral psychologist or anything. I'm just an ordinary exercise therapist. But they wanted to talk. And it's like, perhaps you talk to your hairdresser, I don't know.
Yeah.
But it was, from that point of view, I felt, I can't tell you what it was. It just was so wonderful. And once when I left, I found this feeling of light all over me. And I thought, my God, is this the light? And I started crying and crying and crying. And it was just wonderful. But to come back to, your program is about grief.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I developed a relationship with one of the students that I had, because the staff, I always reported to them. And I said, one of them tried to kiss me, and said, oh, that's dangerous. And they gave me notice. So I told one of them that, because he would always stay after, and I would help him because he was illiterate, and, just listening to him. And he said, oh, I'm going to start breaking tables and chairs again. You can't, and all. He was very angry.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, okay, I'll see you privately. We'll go meet in the park. And so I developed a relationship with him, trying to help him. And it was very successful in the beginning. And then I had to go away on vacation, and then I came back, and then he was totally changed. So psychopaths, and he was a diagnosed violent psychopath. Mm-hmm. He was an arsonist and a rapist. And I didn't know then afterwards. The person that I knew was a totally different person. I know psychopaths are supposed to be manipulative, etc., but I don't believe that he was being manipulative. I think he was being real. Or maybe I'm just naive, still naive. That's why I called him Henry Higgins and me Eliza Doolittle, naive student. But I don't know, quite honestly, because once he got into that real psychopath persona, there was nothing I could do with him, nothing at all. But then I discovered myself that my brother had died 25 years earlier. And why would I talk about my brother? I mean, I remember it was August the 9th. That was the day my brother died. And I said to him, oh, that's my brother's death. Oh, this is a special day for us or something. And one or two other things. And in the long run, I realized that what I thought was this altruism was in fact transference. And I was putting my feelings onto this chap, Henry, to try to get my relationship with my brother or be with my brother, which I only found out afterwards. And it's so strange because what did violent psychopath have in with my brother? They were so different. My brother was a lawyer, an accountant. He was a volunteer policeman, volunteer fireman, you name it. There's no honor that he wouldn't do. And he even went to Harvard for a year. But the only thing they had in common, they were both 34 years old. But I transferred my feelings because before since my brother's death, I cried for 4 months and then it just stopped. But if you mentioned my brother, if we ever talked about him, my eyes would always be full of tears. But since this relationship I had with Henry, it never happened again. So I guess I was carrying all that pain and the grief, and I wasn't even aware of it. And I cut my feelings off. And I can't explain completely what happened, but clearly I worked something through because I could talk about him again without crying or without tears welling in my eyes. So I think people who grieve, they can grieve to grow, or they can cut their feelings off and they don't grow.
Yeah, I agree 100%. It is a choice. It's a choice that we have when we go through grief, and we do often, because of our society says get over it, move on. People ask, are you still grieving? And so we do sometimes cut that off. But the grief will find a way to come back and be addressed, and that's what happened in your case.
Well, I have more than one situation. And when I woke up this morning and I was thinking about our chat today, and I was thinking of something else that I didn't really talk about, another grief. But in between, I could also say, to give a comparison to what I had, is I lost my husband and he was killed in a car accident. So kissed him goodbye in the morning. And then all of a sudden, 2 policemen turn up on my doorstep. And I thought, oh, good, we can talk about a robbery or something. Please come in, sit down. And they kept their feet their eyes on the ground. They didn't look up. Then I was sitting there and it was really strange. All of a sudden, the wheels started turning. And I thought, oh my God, this is like a movie. And I wanted it to stop. All I can remember so distinctly what was going on in my head. I wanted to stop the movie. I didn't know who it was or what. I got up and I screamed at them. I said, get out, get out. And I ran away and they ran after me. And I understand afterwards from a psychiatrist that that's an aggressive response that I had. And I'm not an aggressive person. And I couldn't cry. I was in a state of shock, really. If I just said, I meant I had to make phone calls with the police, then I said, Richard's dead, Richard's dead. And that was it. I couldn't cry. But then afterwards, I started getting depressed. Depression started hitting me. And when I went skiing with my family for Christmas, that was really saved me. And it's very strange because I'm just talking about to show you about the difference of what we were just saying about people who cut off their feelings. That wherever I went, every shop I went to, I told everyone my husband died. My husband was killed. I went to bubble lifts. I said my husband was killed. I didn't stop. I couldn't, dump it stuff. And then I just started working afterwards when I came back to London. That's to deal with that grief. I just numbed myself with work.
Yes.
But those are the contrasts.
That's a really good point. Grief is different for every person. It's different in every situation, with your brother and your husband, and there's no two grief processes that are alike. And I understand that feeling of, because my daughter, we found her in her bed, 15 years old, and she had died overnight. And you're just like, your mind just rejects it, right? Your mind's like, this cannot be true. And you just want to find that off switch, the stop button on life.
Yeah. It's amazing what your brain does. It's just amazing. And then about 6 weeks after, I really believed that. I said, okay, come back, Richard, now stop it. It's nonsense now. Just come back. So there's so many people who've suffered so much with grief, and they have all these crazy things happening to them. And, you can't even believe that. I could have really believed that.
Yes. There again, it's just too much for our brains to handle, and our brains trying to protect us. So it could, that overwhelm and our mind trying to process, and it's just too much. So it just pushes it away. And then, as you were saying, it can come out years later, decades later. You meet someone like Henry, and you're not even understanding what's going on, but you're reliving the thing with your brother in a different way, which can actually lead to healing.
Yes, it did in my case.
Yeah.
But also, you have to remember that I was working with people at their end of their life, in the last furlong of their lives. And when you say about, they're in, it was the same for them. They weren't, some of them weren't accepting who they are or what they are, or they lost it because their life was too painful. Or I gave one exercise session, and one woman started screaming at me, "Stop it, it's my husband's funeral. Stop it, you have no respect." And she went to the head of the home, and she put a complaint about me that I'm interrupting her husband's funeral. And she really believed it. And she seemed normally, and so our minds play havoc with a lot of us. And people who I met, they seemed sometimes very off, or they would be very aggressive, or they wouldn't want to mix with anyone. Or I don't know if you read all the book, but for instance, there was quite a few of them who would be insulting to people and say, "Oh, you're disgusting, you're this, you're that." So I always tried to come around them. Eventually, it worked there very often, that people just put on these masks, the same as saying about grief, that you don't want to suffer grief. You don't want to get involved in life. You don't want to be hurt anymore, or you need to protect yourself. And that happens in these nursing homes all the time. You see it with people as they get older, particularly if they're alone.
Yeah, I think the book is really interesting, because you do talk about these two almost opposite ends of humanity, but humanity that a lot of times we reject. We don't want to be around. The old people, it can be scary. As you said, sometimes they become aggressive. And then the people that we call psychologically damaged. And what I got out of reading the book is, like, you connected to their humanity, no matter how society looked at them. And I was scared for you reading the book in some of the situations you're in. I'm like, I can't believe that she's, doing this, but you were seeing their humanity, and they respected that, and they reacted to that.
Well, if you go through with your heart, I think that's the whole thing. And I did. I mean, I wasn't earning a fortune, I went there because I love what I do. I believe in exercise, and I think exercise is so important for everyone. Particularly, I was too late in the day to become a ballerina, and I'm sure I wouldn't have ever been a good one. But I just believe that, ballet is a metaphor for a perfect life. Because, or any professional sport, anyone over the top of their profession, because what is it? Mentally, physically, spiritually, it's psychological, it's physiological, it's in everything. You have to be totally focused, and everything it all works together. When everything goes together, it's because you've got the technique. And it's like with physics, it's physics as well, because how do they spin the way they are? Because they have to be on a certain axis. You have to know the center of your body, or over the ball of your foot, etc., your head up, your shoulders. You have to know that. That's all technical. And so it's a metaphor for a perfect life. And a lot of people who are troubled have a disconnect with their bodies. And by doing exercise, it brings them back into their bodies. And then also with community, because they also have a disconnect to community. So working with other people. But I think it's so important for everyone, because even I just had a book launch, and there was a psychiatrist there, and he was retired now. And he said he never realized the body connection. And I think now people are understanding the mind-body connection much more.
Yeah.
Like Plato said it, Freud said it, they knew it. And
yeah, that's really, actually, you had a couple of really great points in there. I think one is, I completely agree with you. I think a lot of times we can become so much in our head and forget about spiritually, because that's another thing that we've lost, but we're so in our heads, we forget about our bodies and that mind-body connection and how important it is. But also, as you were talking about ballet being a metaphor for life, I thought, living this life is hard. It's a skill for us to carry on the way that we do. And I don't think we give ourselves enough credit that it's hard to be an adult. We call it adulting, is a term we use here, in the US now anyway. It's like, I'm tired of adulting, because it's hard, all the things we have to do. And some people just don't manage that very well.
I think it's a question of having your values right. I think that's what it is. I think if you deal with your heart, and you really, they say this, I think I wrote in the book, there was love and fear. Those are the two basic emotions. Fear being a very big word, envy, avarice, greed, or whatever you like. Or if you work with love, you might not succeed all the time. You might be wrong, because we're human, we all make mistakes. But if you're acting out of love, then you can't go wrong.
Right.
Yes, you can make mistakes. Yes, you can. It might not be successful, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what anyone else says. It's what you feel about yourself. And if you've done your best, you might not have succeeded, but as long as you did your best and you tried your hardest and you did it with a good heart, that's all that matters. And I think if people do it from that point of view, the people who are successful, in the nursing home that I wrote about in A Reason to Carry On, in the different nursing homes, you had people who really were in a dreadful state, totally paralyzed, debilitated, nothing in life. And yet they were grateful. They said, oh, they're grateful to be so well looked after. And they weren't so fantastically looked after, but they were grateful for everything. And then you have people who have this sense of entitlement, or this isn't good, or this isn't good, or that one's not good. So it's really your attitude to life. It's not the life you have, but it's how you live it.
Oh, yeah, extremely. But I want to go back to something you said earlier, and there's always been this nature versus nurture debate, right? So who are we? And having had a couple of children and seeing how they come out, they have personalities. Anybody that's had more than one child knows that, they come with personalities. But we also are formed, as you said, by all these influences around us. And almost universally, when you see people that are in the institutions, the criminally insane or whatever, you can trace that back to something that happened to them earlier in life.
Well, not always. Sometimes people are born like that, you know.
So you go ahead.
Sorry, the message is people can change.
Mm-hmm.
That's the positive things.
Okay. Okay.
Some people can change. It doesn't apply to everyone.
Right.
Most people can change. Even if you have a brain problem with your brain, if the brain is damaged,
Mm-hmm.
there are ways for, that we can get around it. The brain, there's ways to get around it. People are written off by doctors and they can go on and on because we're human. We don't know all the answers.
Right.
But there is a way if people really strive, but if they have to have the right attitude,
Mm-hmm.
you have to do it with the right heart. If you're looking for happiness, you're not going to find it. If you're, it will always elude you. But if you're just looking to be the best person you can be and do the best you can be,
Mm-hmm.
and life, succeed.
So you mentioned, and you worked with a bunch of people, and you mentioned Henry, that you felt like you were getting to at some point, but then he kind of slipped back. Do you think that, so there are some people that just are not going to be able to change as long as they're in the body?
Well, he was so happy and he was helping other people. He was taking someone else from the hostel and showing him what I showed him. It was a big divide between the east and west of England, London.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, he'd never been down some places. I took him to the theater to see My Fair Lady, and he really enjoyed it. And he said, we went into the Savoy Hotel, into the lobby, and he said, oh, sauce, it's someone like me. I mean, sorry, I can't do a Cockney accent very well, but would, put my foot in a place like this.
Mm-hmm.
So appreciated. He was grateful.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got the other person that, something just went.
Yeah. But somehow it feels like you reach some level of humanity with him. It's like I think that spark is always in people. There might be something physically that's so damaged that they can't bring it through, or maybe not consistently. But what I loved about reading your book is like you tried, and with some of these people, it might have been the first person that ever treated them with that type of respect.
Well, apparently I found out afterwards that there was someone before me, so he suckered in, and so he knew how to, what he wanted. For some reason, I don't know what it is, but he asked me to be in touch with his psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist said, he's very dangerous, don't go near him, I'm giving you my phone number if you need. I mean, I would never have thought it about the same person, so how do I know? I don't know, but it's my hope and belief that he did have that window open. Even sometimes we say, oh, the light's on, but nobody's at home.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe someone was at home for that minute or so, or for that short time.
So, with the older people that you worked with, tell me what that experience, what was like with some of them, and how you brought them out, because you mentioned some of them could be withdrawn, some of them were aggressive. So how did that work with you?
Well, I think it was a very funny story in a way. I told when I went into this very poor nursing home, and there was one woman and she kept taking off her clothes, and I was only there for an hour a week, but I knew her her anatomy from top to bottom, really. And this other woman, she would always say, oh, you're disgusting, you're horrible, and all that. And then I come in one day and they're sitting together holding hands. And this became a real love story. The woman who was so difficult, she was starting to treat her like a pet. And she stopped disrobing. It happened occasionally, but not often. So there you saw love. It might have been the first time in her life. And this person who was so hard-hearted, who knows what happened to her in her life, that she was so aggressive to anyone. So and that happened more than once. So who can say, who can say what happens? And then the woman who was disrobing all the time, she died. And the other woman, she was obviously obsessive compulsive, and then she was putting her anguish into other things, like in emptying her handbag all the time, or, and she had to be moving all the time. So who knows? But, nothing can surprise you when you're mixing with people.
So, what do you believe in terms of like spiritual growth from the challenges we go through in life? Is there a reason for the challenges we go through?
Well, I believe in reincarnation, because I don't believe that, a lot of people don't believe in, well, when I say about God, I mean the light, anything, but to have faith. Everyone needs to have faith, because I don't see what the alternative is. We've all had our hard times, and what I consider hard is when you don't have your health. That's the only thing to me that's really matters, because anything else you can overcome, but ill health you can't, unless you get cured. So I think you can overcome most things in life, and the only thing is your health. And so with spirituality, to me, I believe there is something greater, and I've seen it. I think I wrote about when I was in Costa Rica, and I was taken away by a riptide, and I started swimming. I was out of breath. And then I decided, okay, I'll float. And I prayed and floated, and I kept being taken under. Kept being taken under all the time. Oh my God. And then I saw a vision of my daughter running along the beach with people behind her, and she was wearing black, and they were going towards my body. And there I was in the water, and that's what I saw. And then I hit a sandbank, and I got out, and I was vomiting the whole time. And the next day along the beach, I saw there were crosses erected for all the people who lost their lives on the beach. So when I talk about I wasn't hallucinating. There is another reality there. Also, when I saw the light, I told you the time, and I just started crying because I was on the right path. There are moments that come where you see light, or you think, oh yes. And it's not always, or it's not always there, but there is something greater. And that's what I tried to teach Henry and the other people, the people that really I spoke to most. And I wasn't qualified, but the psychiatric ex-offenders. But I tried to give them the idea there's something greater than ourselves. You're not alone. Why don't you talk to your whoever it is, a little angel? Just think of it as an angel, and you're not alone in life. Who's there? Someone there for your good, who wants to be there for you. And whatever people believe in, that's so important to have faith. Just because you believe and you pray doesn't mean you get what you want, because we don't know what we're meant to do. We're here for a reason. We're here to learn and to better ourselves. But I always say that if you don't learn your lesson, you're going to come and, it's going to happen to you again. So you might as well get it this time, because you'll only have to face it again. Listen, nobody has proof. Nobody knows. With faith, even people who are really religious leaders or whatever, they have their doubts at times, because we don't know it. You're not supposed to know. Wouldn't it be boring if we knew what was going to happen to us? I've had my time in the past going to psychics and astrologers, etc. I don't anymore, because I made a promise to someone who was working with me who was very religious. And she told me, no, you mustn't do that. Please promise me, and all that. And yet she had visions. She said it was the Holy Spirit. It was okay for her to tell me what was, but no one else.
I've heard that many times, yes.
Yeah. And so I don't, and I just trust myself, and I, believe in doing what's the best that I can be,
So, yeah, that's really interesting that you talk about being able to know the future and stuff. And I think there's a certain amount of, we're not supposed to know too much, but that can go too far. And then we forget who we are. So again, we can look at people like the people that you worked with as throwaway people. These are people who are so damaged, they serve no purpose in life. Let's just put them away and forget about them, because they don't have the same value as say other people do. So I think that belief really changes the way we view other people, even though they may be damaged at some level. I think there's a part of them that's still whole.
Oh, most definitely, because everyone has a purpose in life. You know, even Henry, look what he did for me, and look what he's done, that I have my book to write because of him, and how it helped me with my brother, my problems with grieving. So no one, even people who was, if you remember in the book, there's also about people who have the brain capacity of a baby, adults. And I tried, and I thought, oh, I was successful. Maybe I got something, and I thought I had a smile, and it was wind. It wasn't, I couldn't get through to them. It was a waste of time. But the parents and the people who look after those people, if you look at them, a religious figure said that those people, you have to believe in reincarnation. If you believe those people have nothing to learn here, we have to learn. But their souls are so elevated, they have no reason to be here anymore. And we're honored to be able to be with them. And if parents of handicapped children, look at their children, how they're blessed, and that their child is giving you an opportunity to grow in a way that you would never have done otherwise. I'm not saying it's easy. We're not here for pizza and parties, etc. We're here to grow and learn, and some people have harder lessons than others. But the rewards that you get you can't compare it.
I have to tell you this. My mother-in-law is in a facility for dementia, and she's getting to the point where she doesn't remember, who we are and stuff like that. And my wife has gone through this before, because we went through it with her father also. But I have a friend who's a medium, and she just wrote a book, and she's talking about when these people that we think we're not getting through to, when they actually do cross over, they know what's going on. They, on a soul level, they know. So we feel like they're not hearing me, they're just drooling, they're whatever. Their soul is still aware. And
exactly. That's the point, that their souls are so elevated. They don't need to talk to us, or they have to communicate with us.
Yeah, and they actually start going over to the other side a lot more than we realize. When we think they're out of it, they're visiting the other side. They're visiting where they're going to go. But there is still something for us to learn from their existence, and the caregivers that care for those people like you, what you get out of doing that. And I have friends that have had severely handicapped children that have never spoken, that have lived for 11, 12, 14 years. And they say it's the best thing that ever happened to them.
Yeah. Yes, I know someone else like that. She adores this boy. So everyone has a purpose. There's a reason for everyone to carry on.
Yeah. So speaking of a reason to carry on, that's what you titled your book. So I guess the lesson from this is that every life has value. Would you say that's a good way to summarize it?
Absolutely. Every life has a purpose, and every life has a meaning, and every even though that's what made me look when Henry in the book, he's the one, this illiterate person with no education, got me to start thinking that he told me the story about laying on the road and in front of a pub, and someone put out their hand to help him up, and he said, what's the point? You get up like a yo-yo, up and down like a yo-yo. I might as well just start, keep fixing drugs. That's all. He was a drug addict. And so that's what got me thinking and looking at all the other disadvantaged people I worked with. And that's was how the book started.
Right. And it does come back to what you said. It's a matter of how we go about life and how we look at it. But unfortunately, there can become this learned helplessness. Like, I've tried so many times and it just never works.
Absolutely. You know, in one of the homes, there was this very nice man, and he'd had a stroke, and he didn't want to do anything.
Mm.
We had people like that, and he let his wife come in and bring people to play bridge with him or whatever, and he wouldn't do anything. And there was another woman, she'd had a stroke, but she was staying in bed the whole time. They brought her down, and I got her to exercise, and she really seemed happy doing it.
Mm.
And then the head of home told me that her family contacted them, that I mustn't go near her or touch her ever again. She wants to be left.
Mm.
And for me, it was that I took her out of her comfort zone, because she absolutely could do, you don't have to do much, you know,
Right.
just move your fingers and thing to get a little bit of movement, or just to move your body or sway or whatever to get, but you see, it got her out of her comfort zone.
Right.
She was afraid. And that's why I was encroaching on her space.
That's another great metaphor for life, because we can become comfortable with the limitations that we impose on ourselves. And when we find ourselves going beyond that, we'll self-sabotage, right? We'll pull back.
Well, you don't want to grow. You know, I told you, I woke up early this morning and I was thinking about what I'm going to say with you, what we're going to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something I was thinking, shall I admit to something that we've kept a secret or don't talk about? Someone in my family had committed suicide many years ago, and it's just a subject we don't discuss.
Right.
And I thought, well, should I bring it up here? And it started because I covered it up.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and that pain that you get, it's always there because you don't want to think about it. You know,
Mm-hmm.
when she died, she jumped out of a 6th-floor window. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
For her family to know such a thing? But she was diabetic and the sugar had gone to her brain.
Mm-hmm.
But still, we wouldn't talk about it. They shipped off her. She died in Europe, and she was sent off to South America to be buried next to another family member. And it was just something not discussed. But I mentioned that I married very young. And my parents were encouraging me, because I'd met my first husband, and they were encouraging me to marry. I wasn't, you know, I was in school. I was, you know, I was 18. I didn't, you know, I wasn't interested really. And they really pushed this thing. I understand now, because they were in grief. The grief, they want to get out of the grief and have something new.
Yeah.
Forget about it.
Right.
And I was the patsy.
Yeah.
They thought I was better for me, to save me from, you know, life's troubles, but married, you know, comfortably, and then you'll be fine and all that. You like Europe, you know. And that's what happened to me, to avoid the grief, or to break out of that grief.
Right.
And I only came to those, you know, I understood that today when I was thinking about it, because it was such a cut that's never healed. I put a Band-Aid on it.
Yeah. Wow, that's big. Yeah, that's a big revelation. And again, it goes to show that nothing is lost. You know, all these things that we think are terrible tragedies, they're all lessons that we can learn. And I really appreciate you bringing that up and being so vulnerable, because suicide is one of the ways that we put shame on. We put shame on the person that took their own life. We put shame on the family. A lot of times we put shame on ours. We should have known. I should have known. I should have been able to stop it. And there's so much shame around it, which compounds the grief, and it doesn't allow you to grieve properly. And it's one of those things that we do tend to cover up and bury.
How many people are taught how to grieve? Look, I was carrying around so much grief with myself for years. And, you know, I've also miscarried in my life. And, you know, now that you opened me coming to you, you know, speaking to my children, etc., and me talking about grief and such. And they said, Mommy, you know, you had miscarriages and you always denied that it was anything. But a lot of people who have miscarried, they have a grief that they deny. I don't see it as a grief, because I just try to forget about it. But I guess somewhere and some level, there must be grief, but who knows how to grieve? Who teaches you?
Yeah, and there is miscarriages is another one that sometimes with people will look at someone and say, well, you shouldn't grieve because you didn't have the baby, you didn't know the baby, there's really nothing there to grieve, and we'll kind of dismiss it, so people will cover that up. But there's that anticipation, there's that soul connection. I would expect, especially as a mother, which I've obviously never been, but that child is physically connected to you. So there is something there to grieve for sure, and it impacts us. Any loss that we have is grief. And we shouldn't dismiss any of it.
And they should really start teaching grief in schools, I think, because it's such an important part. It's not just dying; it's part of life.
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember someone saying that they had a child and the child had a short life. And someone said, no, it wasn't a short life. It was that person's life.
Yes.
Who was it for you to say that was a short life? That was that person's life.
Yes. Yeah. Well, speaking of that, we met with some parents yesterday who we've all, one thing we have in common is we all had children that have died. And one child was the age of 2. Our daughter was 15, someone else is 17. And my wife and I we've been going through this long enough. It's almost been 8 years now. We're like, none is any better or worse than the other, right? I felt so bad for these people that lost their child at the age of 2. That's, for you, like you said, that is her life. That is her life. It's not a short life or a long life. That's her life.
Yeah.
And that's an experience that those parents will have to carry. But what I've come to learn over the years is that, again, like we've said a couple of times here, nothing is ever lost. That these people with even very short lives have impact. Even people like Henry, who some might say is a terrible, terrible person, and maybe someone might say never should have been born. And he has an impact. He has a role to play. We all have roles to play, and we tend to judge other people's roles, but everybody can be our teacher. And you, because you were open, Henry was able to be your teacher.
Absolutely. But in the Jewish religion, I admire so much that they have the mourning. They know how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Because many other people, religion, they just go back off to work or they whatever, but they don't deal with the grieving. And it's so much to have a week where you just don't do anything but you grieve and people come to you and honor you. Or then a month, if you're a wife, you have to not allowed to do anything for a year. If you're a child, if your parent died, you're not supposed to do anything for a year. I think it's very important because it gives people structure.
Mm-hmm.
And allows them to grieve and makes them grieve. And I think it's very, very important.
It is. It absolutely is. And you're right. And again, conversation we were just having yesterday, someone's like a sibling had passed and they had like 3 days off, and because we say, well, it's just a sibling. It's not a spouse. It's not a parent, so you've got 3 days to get back to it. And
siblings, your right arm. Your siblings are part of you.
Absolutely.
My arm has never been the same.
Right. Right. So you're right. We don't give people the space. We don't give people the time. We kind of prioritize what grief is. We have shame about certain types of losses. And frankly, that's one of my missions is to get over all that, to get over all the shame, to get over, to tell people, it's okay to grieve. It doesn't matter how long it takes. It's different for everybody. As you said, it's different every situation. With your brother was different than with your husband, and it's going to be different with the next person that you lose. And same for me.
But people have to understand that on a physiological basis, it takes the body 3 years. Remember, we talked about the body.
Mm-hmm.
We're all forgetting about your body, because the body takes 2.5 to I was told by someone who dealt with old people or whatever, and he said it takes the body, a doctor, 2.5 to 3 years for the body to get through the grieving, even more.
I hadn't heard that, but it makes perfect sense to me. Because again, dealing mostly with parents who have lost children, I tell people 2 years is early grief. When people tell you you should be over it in 2 years, no,
Oh,
2 years,
way.
2 years, you're just starting to get over it.
Yeah.
Yeah, from my experience, I'd say 3 years. Yeah.
Yes. 2.5 is physiological. Your
Yeah.
body is
Yeah.
telling you. So if your body is telling you 3 years, you've got to look after yourself. And people don't listen.
Yeah.
Wonder why there's so many problems in life. Because people aren't listening. They're trying to patch it up, whatever. But if people understand, it's at least a 3-year process.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't mean when these people in these nursing homes that I met, and if it was even a bad marriage, they still miss that person. They have synchronicity, their body clocks and everything was working together.
Yeah.
From a bad marriage, you still have it.
Yeah, let's talk about the body clock thing, because again, I think sometimes people don't really understand how synced up we are when we live with someone.
Yeah. Your rhythms are together. It's very sad when people who are owls marry larks, because
Yeah.
it's difficult because you have different time frames. But if you're on the same time frame, then everything sort of synchronizes together. I'm sure you synchronize from other ways as well.
Mm-hmm.
But coming back to we spoke about ballet and the body and the importance of the body with the mind and the spirit.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So why should it be different? Why should it not be there for grieving and for loss and pain? It's very much there. And I think people have to be aware of it and listen and hear what, is going on in their lives. Like the best thing that happened to me again is when I broke my leg, because I was forced. I was forced to stop running.
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting perspective, and so for you to take that and say, okay, now I'm forced to make a shift. I'm literally forced to slow down and to reprioritize, and then you found your passion.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I wouldn't have found it perhaps otherwise, because I was brought up, oh, you have to do this, or you have to do that, or you expect to do this. I remember when I went to my first ballet class, it was a jazz ballet, and the teacher was talking about art and architecture and science and technology. And I said, what is an ordinary dance teacher talking about these things? Because we have these fixed ideas about people.
Right, right.
They know they're just a dancer, but to be a dancer, you need to be all those things.
Mm-hmm.
And people in life, you need to be whole. You've got to be more than just what you're doing and what you are.
Right.
Because we've got the spirit, we've got the emotional, we've got the body, we've got the mind, we've got it all. And you've just got to work it all together.
Yeah, exactly. And then, as you said, to take the opportunities that come in life and then to integrate those and move forward and roll forward those. Because I think it's really sad. And when people say, well, I haven't found my purpose in life yet, and I've wasted my whole life. And I'm like, no, nothing's ever wasted. Even though you may not be doing your passion yet, everything that you have done is integrated into who you are today, and it's making you ready for whenever that next thing comes along. But as you said, you believe in reincarnation. I believe we have one continuous life that's broken up by birth and death. We come in and we go out of the physical world, but we do have one continuous life, and we've got forever to get it right. So we can learn things while we're here. Hopefully we do learn things while we're here. So we don't have to come back and repeat the same thing, because as I said, this place is hard, but nothing's ever lost. Everything that we go through, we can learn something from.
But I think if you have the tools, and I know you don't, think you believe so much in organized religion anymore, but I think to really, because a lot of people don't teach it properly, or they don't know what it's about. But I think there you have, it doesn't have to be religion, it could be any belief or system.
Sure.
But gives you a structure
Right.
to where you belong in, where you follow the principles, because they were all, set down a long time ago.
Oh yeah, I believe there's a great deal of wisdom that mankind has forgotten, that we've rejected, and that's a big part of our issue. Whether whether they call it spirituality, call it religion, that's knowing who you are as a whole person, as we keep coming back to, body, mind, and spirit. Whereas modern man says we're just our brains, right, and everything else is inconsequential. And we have to address that whole person. So I completely agree with you. You have to have the tools to integrate this stuff, and that perspective that everybody, no matter what, is of the same value, that we all have that same inherent spark of divinity within us that sometimes gets covered over. Sometimes our brains are so damaged it really can't pull it through, maybe, but it's still there.
It's just being open to it and understanding it. Remember, I wrote in the book that when my brother died, I discarded religion. I said, what is this? You let someone suffer like that? And it didn't have the answers for me, because then I went looking down the Eastern Trail and going back, and then I came back again to religion, because it's all there. It wasn't taught properly, or I didn't learn it. And now with the internet and all that we have to learn, we can learn. There's no excuse anymore. Everyone, if they want to grow and they want to learn and they want to have a better life, it's all there for us.
Yeah, I agree with you. And religion is really interesting, because I've gone back and forth. I was raised in a very fundamentalist faith, and I, rejected that. I never really became an atheist or materialist, but I kind of went that direction a little bit. And then people rail against religion, right? Because they say, well, religion got it wrong, so religion's terrible. And it's not. There's a nugget of truth, I believe, in every major religion. They're mostly the same. They overlap way more than we'd like to admit sometimes. But they get a few things wrong because people are human, people are men. So we project these things on the God, that God's judgmental and this is going to happen and that's going to happen. But there is a kernel of truth, I think, in all major religions. And so I agree with you. We can take those things, like, for example, that we are spiritual beings and that we need to have time to grieve, and setting forth those boundaries to say, for a week, I'm going to just sit, for a week. And a lot of times in our society, we don't allow people that. We don't give them more than a couple of days.
Or just to be. But I think there's much more to religion than what you're saying, because it's like someone said, you have to look at the minutes of the last meeting. And I think explains it all, because I do believe it's there, and it's all, I think it's there, and it's correct. And all the great sages, and, they just try to get better at it, better and better at it. And, these great philosophers from 2000 years ago, no truths change. Just because we have the internet now, they only had the wheel then, doesn't mean the truth changed.
Right.
Same truth. Yeah. It's how they present it. The truth is right there. And the answers are there too. Not all the answers, because I don't believe we're supposed to know them all. But, and as I say, some people might not agree with me, but I find it that, not to have religion or not to have a belief, it's very difficult. I don't know how people survive things.
I agree with you. It's really interesting, because I've seen people that become materialistic atheists, and I always add the term materialistic to that, because these are people that just like, it's all physical. That's all that matters. And then they'll try to say, well, I can derive morality. I don't need religion to be moral. I don't need religion to be moral. I don't need religion to have hope. I don't need religion to have this or that. But as you said, it's all that. You can't reject the tens of thousands of years that we've had these teachings, and that's brought us to the point we are now. And if you look at the teachings of Jesus and Muhammad and Buddha and Gandhi, they're all the same truth. So there's nothing new to discover when it comes to morality. So it doesn't make sense to just throw it all out and try to start over again.
Exactly. And no, it's a beautiful, big, beautiful world out there. For us to put meaning, it's like I say that in the book, at the end I said that, how do you explain to someone what art is? How do you explain music? How do you explain love? You can't. You
Right.
have to put the meaning in those things. And it's same with the meaning of life. You have to put meaning in your life. And how do you do that? You listen to that still inner voice. You just be. You don't try to force anything. Just be and be nothing. Like me being forced to break my leg to sit at home and not be able to move and just, be in pain. And that's how it came to me.
Yeah.
And by the way, I just want to say my leg should have healed in 3 months, 3 to 4 months. Something wanted me to learn the lesson that it took a year for my leg to heal.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was like, this is what it's going to take for you to find your path.
Well, I wasn't getting it. I was sitting around 3 months, 4 months, 6 months. I still didn't get it.
Right.
It took a whole year.
Yeah.
I didn't get it.
Yeah, well, as you said earlier, we talked about, reincarnation, come back and doing the same lessons. And some people believe that even while we're here in this one life, that if we don't get it, then the universe will, God, whatever you want to call it, will just keep nudging you, until we do get it.
Yeah, we have a reason and a purpose, and we've got to do it. If not, you're back again.
Yeah. Well, Vony, I really enjoy our time together. Tell people again, remind people of the title of your book and where they can get it.
A Reason to Carry On, and it's on Amazon.
Vony, great talking today. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you so very much. I enjoyed it tremendously.
All right. Enjoy your afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
I'm excited to announce I have a great new resource. It's called GEMS, 4 Steps to Move from Grief to Joy. And what it is, it's 4 things that I've found that I do on a daily basis to help me to navigate my grief. And I'm offering it to you free of charge. It's a free download. Just go to my website, www.grieftogrowth.com/gems, GEMS, and grab it there for free. I hope you enjoy it.